I don't have a copy of the book with me, but there's a bunch of them outside. I've been waving it around for the last few weeks, and it is a reminder that we are in this book series. It is a reminder that we're talking about what it means to belong to the church and to be more than just a member. So let me give you a quick overview. Greg did the same thing last week. I watched his message, and I was very impressed. Matter of fact, he's a little scary how good he's getting, isn't he? But I will tell you, the most important thing he said in his message, I don't know if you heard it, I hope you did. He said that Dan's actually 25 years old. I don't know if you knew that, but I look a little older, but he actually said I'm 25. First chapter was, I will be a functioning church member. That means there are certain factors and things we look at, but when we look at life in the local church, honestly and personally, it's about the choices that we make. And the choices that we make are made up of small choices, and we have walked through why it's not about us when we make this choice. We are, according to Rayner, he says that we are minimizing the importance of the local church and that we don't place high expectations on what it means to be a member. And so he says church members need to look into the mirror because church members expect service without giving it. And so he says this is a time for enlistment, not entitlement. So we are in the enlistment time of our church. Right now we're talking to folks. We're talking to folks about becoming deacons. We're talking to folks about becoming part of the leadership team. And I would just encourage you. There's 3 cards outside that talk to you about 3 particular areas of ministry that we have. And if somebody has come to you and you have said no, I would just tell you that's a dangerous thing. Let me just tell you why. Let me just explain what I mean. If somebody else believes in you enough to ask you, it's not about just filling spots around here, folks. I don't do that. When your name is given through a process that we talk about, we really believe that you're the person to move on that. And so if you say no, I hope that you have got some really good spiritual reasons for saying no. Chapter 2 is, I will be a unifying church member. The premise of this chapter is that it is not just about you, but that you have made a clear decision never to be a divisive force in the church. Let me just add real quickly. Last week I shook the hands, and I won't use his real name here, but a man who absolutely gave me gray hair when I was in Winchester. He aged me 20 years, at least for a while there. He did that with every pastor that has ever been there, and there he was on a very circuitous route. He had left the church after I left because the next 2 pastors were awful pastors, according to him. You know what I'm thinking, don't you? He just didn't know how good he had it, right? But here he comes, standing in the line, and I have never in the 7, 8 years I was there ever had him say to me, man, that was a good message. And he and his wife kissed me from head to toe. Now, I mean, not kissed me really, but I mean, they talked about how wonderful message I gave. Guess what? I gave wonderful ones back then. How do I know that? My wife said so. Chapter 3 is, I will not let my church be about my preferences and my desires. It's got to be more about the body. And if this gray-headed guy is going to turn this church over here in a few years to a younger congregation, we got to get ready. We got to get at it. And there's a reason why we have a staff of folks that are in their 30s. And fourthly, I will pray for my church. And let me read you specifically. And it's not about poor Dan, but this is what the pledge in chapter 4 says. I will pray for my pastor every day. I understand that the pastor's work is never ending. His days are filled with numerous demands that bring emotional highs and lows. He must deal with critics. He must be a good husband and a father. And because my pastor cannot do all things in his own power, I pray for him to have strength and wisdom daily. I'm just going to tell you, the story that they give at the beginning of this chapter, if you've not read it, read it, is not unrealistic. I have lived many of those days. Now, this isn't about poor me, but it's about remembering something. Last week, of all places, my friend who owns about 10 Arby's was at the church. He lives in Somerset now. You know my story with Chuck, the illiterate man, it's a long story. I'll tell you about it sometime. He's a very bright guy, but he calls himself not illiterate, but he says, well, I'm just illegitimate because I can't read. Well, that's a long story, but Chuck says that. Chuck owns the Arby's there in Winchester, and afterwards he took us. Where else would you go? We went to Arby's. We sat in this room in the back where I used to sit. I remember challenging. There was 4 men that kept bugging me about, oh, Dan, I think God's called me to the ministry, and they were just, they were wearing me out because they wanted, an hour or two a week, and there's 4 of them. So I said, okay, guys, meet me at 6 o'clock at Arby's, and we'll talk about God. One of them that did is in this picture here. He came up and he says, Dan, I just want to make sure I have a picture of your being here today. He served in another church in our community. He's full-time pastor now, and he wanted to have a picture with me, and all I could say to him was, what happened to your hair? No, I didn't say that to him. But Gordon was one of those young men that sat in back of Arby's with me all those early mornings, and I'm honored. All right, let's dive in. We're going to study what is one of the most misunderstood passages in all the Bible. It's either misunderstood, misused, or misapplied. But I think it's one of the most favorite passages we like to talk about. Why? Because even people who normally scoff at the Bible, or don't know the Bible, or reject the teachings, or ridicule the content of the Bible, love to say at just the right time, how many of you heard people say this? Judge not, that you should be judged. I've heard that liquored up view of Scripture many, many times. Because they're saying that because, oh, don't judge me. Well, when you ask Jesus that question, he would not give you an unequivocal no. He would say to us, it all depends. So let's find out why it depends. Now, I've copied for you verses 3 and 5, and I want to start just a little bit earlier in verses 1 and 2 there. Don't condemn others, and God won't condemn you. God will be as hard on you as you are on others. He will treat you exactly as you treat them. You can see the speck. We'll find out later that the Greek word there is splinter, literally splinter, in your friend's eye, but you don't notice the log. That's why they're playing off the words there, log and splinter. You won't notice the log in your own eye. How can you say, my friend, let me take the speck out of your eye when you don't see the log in your own? You're nothing but show-offs. First, take the log out of your own eye. Then you can see how to take the speck out of your friend's eye. Okay, number one, we ignore the log and we concentrate on a speck because our egos are fragile. Okay, for those of you who need visuals, this log that's in front of my eye, when this splinter is in somebody else's. So if I'm trying to find, get past my own log to see your splinter, this is what it looks like. Okay, visual image, isn't it? Very strong image that we need to remember. So we ignore the log and concentrate on the splinter because our egos are fragile. They are. We don't want to be told that, somebody's going to judge us, and so we back off. Let me just say it as clearly as I can say it. You can judge a person's methods, but you probably will never completely be able to judge knowingly their motives. I understand that. You can judge the means with which they live their lives and the produce that comes from their lives, the fruits that comes from their life, but you cannot judge their minds. So there are two standards that we will operate from. First of all, is that we've got to make sure we have the right standard. What is the right standard? The right standard is the Word of God. And that's why it's incredibly important for you and I to know what the Bible says. That we know what it says. And that we can draw that standard up right beside what it is that we're trying to make a decision about. So there can be a wrong standard or there can be a wrong spirit. You've seen folks. I've told you 100 times there's two ways to break open an egg. One way is to create an atmosphere where the egg can hatch, and the other one is just get you a hammer and break that baby open. It's easy enough to do. Some of us we carry hammers. Secondly, we ignore log and concentrate on respect, not only because our egos are fragile, but because honesty is difficult. Isn't it though? How many people would rather just leave the church or whatever than be honest? And I will simply tell you, not being able to be honest, I don't really even care your personality profile. You need to be able to be honest in a loving, kind way. You know that acrostic I use, BOD, benefit of the doubt. You constantly need to give each other the benefit of the doubt, and if you do that, you can always be honest. This lady in an airport who, right before getting on the plane, she went and she needed a book to read, and she got her a little, one of those little package of cookies. So she sits down in the terminal there waiting for things to get started. Sure enough, she's starting to read her book. She looks over, and a man sits next to her. And he reaches over and begins opening a package of cookies. She looks at him. Then he picks one up and puts it in his mouth. And she looks at him with glaring resentment. She is steamed. So she reaches over and gets one of the cookies and holds it up and looks at him and pops it in her mouth. Now you can begin to get a feel for what's going on here. There's a kind of cookie showdown, But sure enough, he kept doing it. He kept picking cookies out and eating them until finally there was only one cookie left. You know what he does? He reaches over, gets the cookie, breaks it in half, and pops one in, holds the other half, and walks into the plane. Well, she said it took everything in her to not attack him. So she finds her way to her seat. She's making her way there. She reaches in her purse for a tissue, and sure enough, she finds her package of cookies. Folks, we don't always know the honest truth, and honesty is difficult, isn't it? Thirdly, we ignore log and concentrate on a speck because understanding is demanding. For you and me, I'm going to take the log from my eyes and see your splinter. It means that I'm going to have to understand who you are. I'm going to have to understand you. What part of you wants to understand somebody? Well, we categorize people. Well, they're this, this, and this, and I don't like 2 or 3 of those. No. I've just got to tell you, some of you are so different than me, it's a miracle of God that I like you at all, isn't it? And you for me too, isn't it? I mean, we just are different, but by the grace of God, we love each other. I can't believe how many y'all I love that I can't even believe I like, it's weird, isn't it? But every church has what I call spec inspectors. They're looking around all the time for the splinters, the little things that are different. Someone has even called them splinter specialists. Someone has even said they belong to the FBI, the Fundamentalist Bureau of Investigation. You know who they are. They look at you and they don't have any desire to understand you because they're going to characterize you by what they think you are. There's an owner of a large manufacturing plant who decided to, you know how they do now, they surprised to show up and they're incognito and he's making his way through the manufacturing plant that he owns, and sure enough, he's watching folks as they work, and he's kind of watching things, and he comes up and he sees this guy just kind of leaning against the wall, just kind of jawing with a bunch of people. And he watches him, and he watches him, and he says, that guy's lazy. So he walks over and looks him right in the eye and says, how much do you make every week? He says, $500. And he said, pulls his wallet out, $100, hands it to him. Says, I want you to know you don't work here. You're out of here. So he'd made a big splash, and he was kind of pumping his chest out, walked over to one of the assistants and said, "How long has that guy been working here?" He says, "Actually, he's the delivery man. He doesn't work here at all." Understanding is demanding. It takes time and effort and energy to understand people. Fourthly, we ignore a log and concentrate on a speck because we understand that grace is an absolute mystery. Last week I spoke on the mystery of God's grace because here was a man who I served with while I was there, who I will tell you, God, you would think, made a mistake when he called this guy into ministry. He didn't like being in the pulpit at all. He just didn't like doing that. He was about he's a 6'7" guy. I mean, now he's grown into a ministry that I can't imagine. He even does funerals now, which when I was there, when they said somebody had passed, he ran home because he didn't want anybody to, even think about asking him to do anything. But grace of God is a mystery for what God has done through this man in the 40 years that he is there. So let me say it as honestly as I can say it. It is not wrong to confront a person with their sin. Matter of fact, I would be so bold as to say it is wrong when we don't. Leviticus says, "You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him." Now, how honest do I become? We've had a tough year. I say that in the letter. The glimmer of this hero guy, this boy come home, is gone. You know what I'm talking about. Those of you who've been around here for a while, the first 4 years I was there, oh man, Dan, he'll take care of anything. He's the miracle man. And then I did something. I changed some things. People started biting at my ankles. And we had somebody that took me on personally. You all know about that. And to this day, I can look at some of you and you still look away because you're not quite sure that Dan has his glimmer. You're not quite sure he's right. You're not quite sure. Well, let me just say to you, as honest as I can say it, I have as much certainty about my travel here 7.5 years ago to be your pastor today as I had then. And there's absolutely no doubt that I'm supposed to be your pastor right now, that I'm supposed to go through this hellacious year with you, where if you thought it was awful, welcome to my world. Because I'm just going to tell you, it was hell. And it would have been much easier to do something else. But just like that man at Central who told me I didn't have a ministry when I was starting my ministry, I didn't kowtow and run away then, and I'm not going to run away now. When this passage came up in the book and I saw the old log and speck, and I talked to you about in our letter today, I'm ready to turn this page. I'm ready for you to rediscover that you have a pastor who loves you and who is serving with you. I'm ready for you to step up and to move forward and to get on with being church. And it starts at a communion table. Yeah, I've had a week to think about it. I've had a week to reflect on what ministry means. I've gone to 2 of my former churches in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And you know what? They're half the size of when I was there. And that has nothing to do with Dan Francis and everything to do with the fact that we live in a society today that is so hypercritical of pastors and leaders. And we've got to make a decision to love and support our leaders. Because there's no middle road here. I was going to tell you at the end of the service, but I'll just tell you now. Unless something happens, there's going to be a for sale sign on my home this week. That's right, Neva and I have decided to downsize. We're not running anywhere. We're not going anywhere. I know some of you have been wanting to put a for sale sign in my home for I don't know how long. There's a few of you, not too many. We're not going anywhere. We're downsizing our house. I've been begging and pleading with my bride for years. And I'll tell you, she is one brave lady, and she has chosen this transition, and we're going to do that by the grace of God. So don't any of you say, I know, he's running off. I'm not going anywhere. I don't often compare myself to Jesus, but I think standing in front of this table, it might not be a bad thing to do. On a night when they said to him they didn't know what in the world he was thinking about doing, he just said, prepare yourself. Prepare yourself to take the bread and take the juice and remember that the plan that I have lived out is not the plan that you thought I would live out, but it is God's plan.